Hi, welcome to today's video. I'm going to talk about unit testing with complex projects. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project called tests. To do that, we need to right-click on the solution, add the tests project, and then once we do that, we need to go set solution dependencies. Okay, and that tells the project to build all the other layers first before we do testing. Then we need to add references to the other projects that are in our solution. And then we can create unit tests within the tests project. Something else that's not up here is we need to add folders to mirror how the other layers are organized to make organizing our tests better. And then I'm going to flesh out the employee VO. Okay, now we start by creating a tests project in the solution. So I've got the employee training solution up here. You can see I've got my 4 sub-projects: business object layer, data access layer, infrastructure layer, and presentation layer. So I'm going to right-click on the employee training solution, and I'm going to add a new project. So you want to make sure you've got tests selected over here. So you got these different Visual Studio project types. Click test, unit test project. Make sure that you've got the uppermost folder selected because you want the test projects folder to be on par with these other sub-projects. Select folder, and then I just name my test project test, just like that. You could name it unit test, you could name it test suite or whatever, and then make sure everything's, double check everything, make sure it's set, and hit OK. And now that will add a new project to your solution called test project, and it will create a default unit test class. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you want to then set the project dependency or solution dependencies. So again, select employee training and or right-click employee training solution, and up pops your properties. So select properties, and then from the drop down, click the test project and click all the sub projects. Hit apply, hit OK. Now we're going to focus our attention on this tests project. Expand references. We see we've got 3 references: analyzers, Microsoft Visual Studio Quality Tools, Unit Test Framework, and System. So in order to access objects that are defined, or classes and different things that are defined within these or entities, what do you want to call them, within these business object, within these sub-projects, we want to make sure that we are referencing those sub-projects. So right-click on references, click add, and then make sure that projects and solution is selected, and then just add all the projects that you want to to be visible to the tests project. Hit OK. And that's about it as far as setting up the test, the project. So now what we can do is we can build. So right click and build the solution. Now we have this one unit test. It's not doing anything for us. So I'm going to let's just do this. Let's right click and delete this. Okay, that's the default one that came with it. Now in order to add a test, now let's organize. So we've got the tests project created. We've got the solution dependencies set. We have the references added to the test project references that we need. Now we have to structure the tests project in such a way that mirrors these sub-projects, right? And the only sub-project that I've worked on so far is infrastructure layer. And I've added 2 folders, common and VO. And in the common, which you saw in part 2 of the series, I had an application base class and a static logger. Okay, so let's go back up here. So anyway, so in other words, the important part is that there's two subfolders for this infrastructure layer project. And so I'm going to mirror, I'm going to add folders to my tests project that reflect the organization that I want to keep my tests organized, essentially, right? So long story short, right click on test project, click add new folder. All right, so I'm going to call this infrastructure layer. Okay, now right click again. I'm going to say add new folder, data access layer. Right click again, add new folder, business object layer. Get my fingers to work and right click again, add new folder, presentation layer. Okay. Because if you have like MVC components in your presentation layer, you can test those things, right? Any supporting objects that you add. So now for the infrastructure layer, I'm going to go, since I have two subfolders in my infrastructure layer project, common and VO, I'm going to add those subfolders to the infrastructure layer in the test project folder. So I'm going to say add new folder. And I'm going to say common, and then I'm going to add another folder, VO. So now my tests project looks, organizationally similar to what I have up here, for these projects in my solution. And then, of course, it's easy. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to organize your tests, your unit tests, in such a way to make it easy to figure out, like, okay, well, where's the unit test located for this? And I know Visual Studio makes it easy to find stuff. But when you have a big project and you're working with thousands of files, even though we haven't got to that point yet, it's very helpful to have this organizational structure so you can quickly find the files that you're working on. All right, so now, the other thing that we need to do is, let's create a test, right? So I have, in my VO, I'm going to create a unit or a test class that allow me to test my employee VO. So I have an employee VO component here. The only thing it has is a constructor, right? Because the last part 2 of the video series, we were installing and testing the logging feature, and I don't need logging in my VOs. Logging can go other places, but it was a convenient place to put it. All right, so I'll come back to my employee VO in a second, but what I want to do is create a test in my VO folder in my test project. Okay, so I'm going to say add a new item. So we'll select test, and instead of, I'm going to say a unit test. So this will be, okay, it'll have a little bit more code than the basic unit test. So I'm going to say unit test. All right, and I'm going to name it employee. So here's where you get into like naming. If you have a big project, sometimes it's better to have a little bit more granularity. So I'm going to say employee VO tests. So employee VO tests. So any tests that are involving the employee VO are going to be here, right? Add. So now we have an employee VO test class, and a lot of code's generated for us. But the first thing that we need to do is, if you need to use any other access to any other .NET Framework classes, you had to put the using statements up here. But more importantly is I need to add a using statement so that I have access to the infrastructure, right, .vo folder or namespace, right? Now, how do I know that that's the namespace? Well, when if you click, whenever you create these sub-projects, right, for example, if you right-click on the business object layer and go to properties, then it'll show you what the namespace is. The assembly name will be business object layer, and the default namespace is business object layer. So that if you have a subfolder the namespace of that, let's say if, I don't know if it shows up in the properties. No, the properties are down here, right? But the namespace, so for example, if you open up this employee VO, you'll see that it's in the infrastructure.vo. Namespace is following the folder, convention of, project name, namespace, whatever the namespace, the default namespace is set, that'll be the namespace dot folder that it's in within that namespace. That's automatically done when you create that class in Visual Studio. So if you want to access an employee VO in the employee VO test, you have to add the using directive infrastructure VO. Remember, we've already added the reference to the infrastructure layer. Okay. So now we can access employee VO and create employee VO objects to our heart's content. All right. Now we can build, just to make sure that we're on track here. We can build. All right, everything's running fine so far. Okay, so I have the employee VO test class, and it has a test method, right? Test method 1 right here. I'm going to leave that there. And what I'm going to do is just write a little bit of code to demonstrate, how you could write a test. And then I'll go modify the employee VO class, add a few properties, and do some work on the constructors. And then I'm going to write a test specifically for the employee VO. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new, so here when you create a class, right, when you add a new unit test, it gives you a constructor. Okay, I like to put an initialize method in. Okay, there's a test method right there. So I'm going to come right above this test method, and I'm going to add an test initialize method. So public void initialize. I suppose you could put some stuff in the constructor, but the initialize will before the tests are executed, the initialize method will run once, and anything, I like to put stuff in the initialize method for things that I need to be set up for all tests, to have access to. Now, what am I going to put in here? I'm going to add below this property up here. So like there's a property. I'm going to add a new property, public list string. I'm just going to call it a string list. Okay. String list. Remember, this is just for testing. And I'm just going to say get set. That's all I need. So now in my initialize method, I'm going to say string list. Okay. Let's see here. String list equals new list string. All right, so I've created the string list, and now I'm going to say string list add. Let me see. Hello. Not very imaginative today. Dot add world. You know where I was going with this. Hello world. Okay. Anybody who's old enough to remember Kernighan and Ritchie, the Introduction to the C Programming Language paperback book, or hardback, either one, recognizes Hello World. Okay, so now I've created the string list, and I've given it two strings, Hello World. So for this basic test, that's enough. So now in my test method, I'm going to add some code that just does a few assertions, right? Assert dot not null is not null, right? and I'm going to say string list. So just make sure that property exists. Okay, and then I'm going to do another one, assert dot r equal. Okay, and I'm going to say 2 and string list. So what am I doing here? What I'm saying is that I know I added 2 strings to that list, and I'm just going to say, hey, make sure that that string list count is equal to 2. So save. Okay, now how do I run this test? Well, you can come up here to your menu, your menu, and test, Windows, open up Test Explorer, right? So here it shows we have this test method here, test method 1. You could right click on here and you could say run selected test. All right, and if everything runs fine, it gets a green, which it does. Now I'm going to I'm going to say, all right, well, let's make sure that the string count equals 3. Well, I haven't added a new string, so this test will obviously fail. But another way to run your test is go up to test, run, you can run all tests, right, at the same time, and this time it will fail. So now that's what it looks like when it fails. And when a test fails, it gives you an output down here. So here it says alert equal failed, expected 3, the actual is 2. So this is a good thing to pause on for a second, because like for example for this r equal, assert.r equal, you know, these assert statements have an order. Some of them do, right? R equal, I hit R equal, and if you realize it said the value that's expected is the first parameter or the first argument, and the actual value is the second argument to that method. Okay, so sometimes if you're just beginning and you're in a hurry, or you're experienced and you're just in a hurry, you might get these things backwards. Like you might say, oh, I'm going to do it this way, 3, right? Hit save. Now let's run this test method again. Okay, and it fails, but now you're looking at this message and you're like, well, you expected 2, but you actually got 3, and I'm like, how's that possible? Because these things are out of order, right? So make that 2. Actually, let's just swap these for 2, 2. Now the test will run fine. So select, run selected test. Now we'll be back to green, and we're good to go. Okay, so now let's add another test. But before we do that, let's go modify the employee VO. And I'm going to shut this down and give me some more room. I'm going to remove the log statement from the constructor of the employee VO. And I'm just going to add a few properties to the employee VO class. I'm going to add 3 properties. I'm going to add first name, last name, middle name. So public string first name. I'm going to say get set. Okay, and then I'm going to just come down here and say public string middle name get set. Now, you don't need fields for these automatic properties, because if you're just getting and setting values, you don't need backing fields because they're automatically created for you. Public string last name, open brace, closing brace, and then get set, just like that. So we're good to go here. Now, I have this default constructor here. Let me create another constructor that takes 3 arguments. Public employee VO, and the first argument's going to be a string, obviously. First name, string, last name, string, Whoops, see, dorking that up already. Middle name. And string last name. And then I'm going to set, I'm going to say first name property. All right. Now up in my default constructor, I'm going to say this, and I want to say John Wayne Doe. And get my fingers to work like this, and I can choke up on these since I don't have anything going on in the body here, and move them up here on the same line. All right, I have a default constructor, employee VO, which will automatically populate first name, last name, middle name, last name with, you know, these values, or I can create, right, an employee VO with those arguments. Build. So I'm building the solution. Everything builds fine. Okay, now let's go back to the employee test. Now let's create a new test, right? So I'm going to come right underneath of here. Let me delete some of these extra lines. Delete. 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 Just clean it up. Okay, now I'm going to create a new test. So a test method begins with a test method attribute. Right? Like that. And public. Now the name of this test will be employee VO constructor test. Okay. You can have as many test methods in here as you want, right? So employee VO constructor test. So generally speaking, when you create a test, there's 3 activities that you do within the test, and they are called arrange. Okay, so, and you know, some of these have different names depending on you know what book you're reading, right? Arrange. So you set up the test, you arrange, you know, you get ready to perform the test essentially, and then you'll have act. In other words, you do something, and then assert. So in the arrange code, there would be code here that kind of sets things up within the test in order to get ready to conduct the test. Then you do something, and then you assert to ensure that whatever conditions are required to exist after the test, when the test executes, are in fact enforced, right, with assert statements. So here's an example of an arrange, right? I mean, we have this initialize method. If I could totally have moved this code and put it in the beginning of this method, right? But if my intention is to use this string list in more than one test and have it initialized to those values, then I would just be wasting cycles of the processor if I put it in every test, right? So I put an initialize method, and I know that this thing is always ready to go for all my tests, right? So what I need to do is, so I'll give you an example, but this is totally an example of code that's like, you know, setting things up, okay? But for my employee VO constructor test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 employee VOs. I'm going to say, right, employee VO. Let's go up here, make sure everything. So infrastructure layer, instructor. It says it's unnecessary, probably because I'm referencing infrastructure layer.vo. Okay, employee VO, say E1. Oops, E1 equals new employee VO. Okay. Employee VO E2 equals new employee VO. Well, no wonder this is giving me a hard time. Okay. That's not green. Let's get rid of that. There's something funky there. Oh, I guess I'm just not paying attention. Okay, had to put those parentheses there. All right. Now, so I've created two employee VOs. Act, what am I going to do here? So, you know, according to the employee VO, right, those values are now first name John Wayne Doe. So come here to act, I'm going to say E2 dot first name equals Rick. Okay. Now assert. So let's do an assertion here. Assert dot is not null. E1. So I guess that'd be a good test, right? Make sure the objects aren't null. Well, maybe it's kind of dumb. Is not null. E2. Okay. But what's not dumb, let's see, is assert is not null. E1. Oh, E1 dot first name. Like that. And then assert dot is not null. E1 middle name and E1 last name. Okay. And let's assert dot r equal r are not equal. Okay, so E1 dot first name and E2 dot first name, because they shouldn't be equal because I set one to Rick and the other one should be John. All right, so now let's save this, and you know, if you just run the solution, so let's do this. Let's close them. Let's go window, right? Sorry, test Windows Test Explorer. Excuse me. So now we have another method. So we got to build this. Let's build it. Build solution. So now our other method pops up here and we can run it. So run the selected test. Okay, so it says it fails. All right. So now, you know, the trick is like, well, why did it fail, right? So let's take a look at our, let's hover over our output and it says line 104. So it'll say which line's giving us a hard time. So this one right here, first name, is giving us a hard time. So let's go to employee VO and take a look at what could possibly be the problem. So The first name property looks like it's pretty good, so looks like it's fine. This constructor is just feeding in values to this constructor. So public employee first name, that looks good. Okay, oh, there we go. So that's the problem right there. So the purpose of your testing, right, is to make sure that your code's not broken, first off. And this is this is probably a fairly common problem if you're typing really fast. I'm actually just setting the property to the property, which is why it failed that is not null test, right? The assertion. So I need to put underscore, a lowercase first name, so that I'm using the proper parameter to set that property name when I create an object. So now let me rerun my test. And voila. Okay, everything passes fine. If you're not creating tests as you code, then you're really setting yourself up for failure, especially for bigger projects. And unit testing gives you what I call the testing dividend, right? Where it's more work up front, right? You got to create tests and meaningful tests, right? To make sure that when you make changes to your code, you don't break existing functionality, or you don't break the functionality that you expected behavior. You don't want to depending on what you're doing, and you should have as much test coverage of your code as possible, because if you make a change to code that's not covered in your tests, then you may not figure out that a change to that code broke it until it's delivered, right? At which point then you got to scramble to fix it. So anyway, this purpose of this lecture is not to expound on the benefits of testing. That's pretty self-explanatory, but it is like how do you set up tests? So just to review, okay. To review on how to set up tests, we're going to first off create a new project. So you right-click on Solution and add a new project, right? So it'd be Add, right? New project. And when the project window pops up, select Tests. Okay. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat this morning. Okay. Then once you do that, you want to right-click on, I'm hitting the wrong thing again every time. All right, right-click on your solution, and then right-click Properties, and then select your test project, and make sure that your dependencies are checked, because it depends on all these other projects being built before you can run the tests that depend on them. Okay, and then once you create the new test project, set the solution dependencies, then go into tests and add the references to each of these subprojects within the solution. And the way that you do that is you go right-click on references, add reference, make sure projects and solution is selected, and just click all the subprojects: business object layer, data access layer, infrastructure layer, presentation layer. Hit OK. And then once you do that, then organize your tests project using folders and subfolders to mirror the organization of your projects. So here we have the infrastructure layer project, and then for our tests we have an infrastructure layer folder with the two subfolders that reflect the subfolders that are in the infrastructure layer project. And that's about it. Okay. Testing is important. Integrating it into a big project like this takes a little effort, but once you've got the project set up with testing, it's just a matter of making sure that you're adding tests. Now, test first approach is you'd write your test first, and then you'd write code to make the test pass. I'm not necessarily, I don't practice that when during my normal work, but I'll go in there and write the code, write the test, And then, you know, if I change the code and break it, my tests are telling me that, right? So testing is definitely beneficial. Whether or not you're a strict test first person, great. You know, I don't have that discipline, but any testing is better, no matter how you do it, than no testing. So test, test, test. It pays big dividends. And as usual, if you have any questions, hit me up. Rick@pulpfreepress.com. As always, it's a pleasure to have you listen to one of these videos, and I hope you find them helpful. Have a good day and happy coding.